I think we can all agree that everyone loves a good villain redemption story. Maybe the big bad evil guy finally pushed their villainous underling just a little too far. Maybe the villain and the hero are caught in dire straits and become friends while fighting their way out together. Or maybe the villain finally just fell victim to the ever-potent power of friendship and is swayed over to the side of good. Regardless of the reason for their heel-face turn, villains coming over to the side of the protagonist is often a very rewarding narrative tool, especially if the villain already has complex motives that, if they weren't probably often trying to capture, murder, or otherwise interfere with the protagonist, you could almost justify. One of the largest of these rewards is that it allows the writer to provide a satisfying payoff to the villain's arc and advance the story without having to kill off an established character. Having a villain in the party can also add some refreshing contrast to the story, where the villain might be trying to solve the same problems as the protagonist, but may look at them through a more morally gray, previously bad guy kind of lens. Or maybe it's not even a previously bad guy lens. Another benefit is the added tension of this reformed villain and being unsure whether they're truly reformed or not. Can we really trust that they won't just betray the protagonist and go back to being the bad guy? All around, great things to provide a rich dynamic between characters. But what I like even more than a reformed villain is their near mirror, a protagonist pushed to their breaking point. When something pushes the hero over the edge into a state where they're willing to just give in to their rage and lose any semblance of humanity, where they can unleash hell without the limitations of silly things like morality or empathy. This variant of the trope is satisfying for many of the same reasons as our reformed villain, but is mirrored by coming from the point of view of someone who we're generally meant to empathize with, rather than someone who we're used to rooting against. As the audience, we get our satisfying payoff, we get a darker lens for problem solving, and we get that suspenseful tension of whether or not we can trust this character in the future. While the protagonist is not always strictly the good guy, as a general rule they are meant to be the character that we empathize with the most. They can range from one extreme of your happy-go-lucky childlike shonen protagonist to the other extreme of straight-up anti-hero, or anything in between. But regardless of where the protagonist falls on the moral alignment chart, this is the character whose motivations, worldviews, and values we follow most closely in the story, and we have the most time to get to know. Even when we don't agree with the actions of the protagonist, we can generally understand their own personal reasoning and follow their train of thought to justify how they got there, and say, yeah, maybe I can see where they're coming from. We get a deeper view into their head to see what makes them tick, their strengths and their weaknesses, and how they develop over time. So to see what's enough to actually bring our moral baseline of the story to their breaking point can do just as much for their characterization as when they're mentally sound and acting most in character. It lets us know the limits of their mental fortitude, and when they're at their lowest, which values they're willing to compromise and which are absolutely paramount regardless of the circumstance. For example, maybe when backed into a corner, they're pushed to use a dangerous power they were too scared to use until absolutely necessary, but they will still uphold their strict moral code to not use these powers to kill. It shows us how our character is capable of acting under immense pressure, while also giving us as viewers a sense of fulfillment when this character we've seen get pushed beyond their limits actually gets their revenge and bests whoever or whatever put them there. The protagonist who embodies this trope generally falls into one of three categories. 1, the emotional protagonist, whose intense connection to their allies or die-hard perseverance towards their goal gives them their power, but these same emotions can be leveraged against them. 2, the protagonist possessed by some sort of evil demon or curse, with whom they share a consciousness, who may actually lose control altogether if they're not careful. And 3, the protagonist destined by prophecy to fall. Despite how these differences will affect how the breakdown plays out and the consequences of it, the formula always starts off the same, with a dramatic breaking point. Maybe the protagonist just watched their mentor or loved one be killed. Maybe they learned some new information that makes them reevaluate their perspective on good, whether that information is true or not. Maybe they've just become drunk with power, or caught up in the idea of revenge. Or maybe they've just been kicked too many times while they're down and finally snap. This is typically the lowest point of the protagonist arc, and one final straw has to be the one to break the camel's back. This breaking point is inevitably followed by the breakdown, where things start to differ a bit by protagonist, but is invariably the point where shit starts to get real. By now, the protagonist is probably blinded by rage and sorrow, and is shutting down into full blue screen of death mode as their mental stability rapidly deteriorates. And whoever is responsible for it is either getting really cocky that the real fight is about to begin, or is shaking in their boots realizing they've crossed a line they can't come back from. Here in the breakdown, we the audience get the payoff that we've been waiting for. We've just witnessed something terrible happen to the character who we're meant to empathize the most with. And we've all been in unfair situations where we want nothing more than to just lash out and get justice ourselves. So it can be extremely cathartic when a character with a story we're invested in lets loose all their frustration and we get to experience this relief vicariously through them. When the protagonist lets out a furious battle cry and starts charging forward through tears, or has their eyes go blank as they start floating into the air before absolutely pummeling the shit out of whoever wronged them, we also get to enjoy that secondhand emotional release without having to deal with the consequences ourselves. Not only is this an awesome spectacle of unbridled fury and an excuse to show off new abilities, but it's also an important release of emotional tension for both the character and the viewer. The climax of the breakdown is pure fan service, and it's probably not going to be an even battle. The emotional protagonist has entered a kind of teary-eyed god mode berserk state. The demonic protagonist has given in to their evil counterpart and is fighting with never-before-seen levels of power. And the protagonist of Prophecy has fate on their side. The rage of the protagonist is not a trope that's kind to its villains, and the magnitude of viewer satisfaction that comes with seeing this villain get completely wiped is directly proportional to the severity of the crime they pulled on the protagonist. Which leads me to my next point, the consequences of the protagonist's rage. It's incredibly fun to see the hero go berserk, but it's rare that it comes without repercussion. In fact, it's practically guaranteed that by the end of the fight, the emotional protagonist is going to go too far and continue pitifully beating down on an unconscious, defeated corpse through tears. The demonic protagonist is going to be too consumed by their physical embodiment of darkness co-consciousness, and is going to cause some collateral damage to either their friends or to innocent bystanders. And fate, being the fickle mistress she is going to make the protagonist destined to fall inadvertently do a lot of bad things to accompany any short-term success. As fun as it is to see our hero beat the shit out of their rival, we as the audience still expect some degree of justice and rationality from our heroes. So, whether it takes an emotional speech from the heart of the group or a slap in the face from the childhood best friend of the group, this rampage has to stop somewhere, and our protagonist will have to begin to pick up the pieces. As the protagonist, we're kind of used to seeing this character as our moral baseline for the story, so it's just as important for their character development, and for the story as a whole, to see this character learn from their impassioned actions as it was to see them get their revenge in the first place. And following the same reasoning, the rage of the protagonist is rarely a trope that you actually end up seeing used for the conclusion or the final fight of a story, because the character needs to prove to both the audience and to themselves that they can still solve their problems rationally. Or else your audience might actually end up taking away that your message of the story is that you can just throw a tantrum and all your problems will be solved. Picking up the pieces comes in a lot of different flavors, often involving a total reevaluation of the protagonist's morals. Particularly for the good-leaning characters that are willing to fight evil, but not entirely willing to kill, losing control may be their rude awakening that playing too nice may actually be leaving them in more danger of them and their friends getting hurt, and they may need to be more lenient in their moral code to prevent getting cornered and losing control again. On the other hand, shortly after the breakdown, the protagonist may realize for the first time that, as a result of their actions, they're actually capable of great evil. Given different circumstances, maybe they could be the villain of their own story. Especially if they've hurt someone they care about during their rampage, their companions may even be fearful of what they've seen their ally become. It's common that the protagonist will be hesitant to, or even outright refuse to take action or use any sort of powers shortly after the breakdown, because they're nervous of what they might be capable of. Before the protagonist is back to their true, heroic self, they have to confront the source of their anger and their hatred head-on through training, meditation, or performing more rationally in a similar situation in the future to prove to their companions and to the audience that this character can be trusted again. And when it's pulled off well, this is great character development. We get traits of both the fallen hero archetype and the redeemed villain archetype within the same character. When we see our protagonist completely break down, we'll have learned the extremes it takes to push this character beyond their limits, what darker, less than heroic things they're capable of when they're pushed this far, and we'll have experienced the tension of not knowing whether they're capable of becoming a hero again. Of course, there's always the possibility that they're either unwilling or unable to recover, and their dramatic breakdown actually spirals into a full-on anti-hero story, but that's a topic for another day. Typically, the protagonists will have to fight their demons head-on, either literally or figuratively, depending on whether or not the protagonist is of the cursed by evil entity genre or not, and will have to overcome what made them vulnerable in the first place. Before getting stronger, they must acknowledge their weakness. Despite everything that makes this trope so good, this kind of arc is not without its own fair share of narrative pitfalls that should be avoided to pull it off well. As we touched on previously, the worse the offense is toward the protagonist, the more satisfying their revenge is going to be. But the opposite is also true. If the audience doesn't believe that the offense warrants how the protagonist reacts, you may risk actually taking your hero out of character, or harming how immersive or empathizable they are. Unless you're dealing with a character who were explicitly told from the beginning of the story by some oracle or prophecy that they are going to have this dramatic fall from grace, there's a certain line that has to be crossed in order to make the audience believe that your character could actually react this way. If someone goes and cuts your hero in line at the grocery store, and they go full Super Saiyan and vaporize them, there's no real catharsis there. Your hero's just kind of an asshole. And this line to cross is not the same for each character. Generally speaking, the more positive and good the character, the more it's going to take to break them, and likely the more dramatic their breakdown is going to be. But at the same time, this line itself is actually a difficult thing to navigate, because you can only put your character through hell and back so many times trying to prove that they really deserve this revenge, before your audience decides that they're tired of overly contrived torture porn, and lose interest altogether. And lastly, the timing of this trope is incredibly important, because without ample time to atone for their actions, the protagonist's victory may actually feel unearned and out of character if they just throw a fit and everything works out. When executed properly, the rage of the protagonist gives us a great deal of insight into what the character values most, their closest bonds, and their deepest insecurities. It gives us vicarious emotional relief seeing the protagonist shed the limitations of their moral code, while also providing much needed contrast to the typical hero's journey by showing us what happens when something pushes the good guy enough to stop acting like the good guy. And then once the smoke clears, we get to see the resolve and the humility it takes to return to the hero's path, and see them come out stronger as a result of their development, resulting in both an emotionally satisfying and narratively humanizing arc for our main character. There are plenty of reasons why this trope is so good, but at the end of the day, sometimes it's just plain fun to see your favorite character go feral and spew fury at someone who at this point probably had it coming. Thank you all so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe, and maybe even comment below of shows, movies, or tropes I should discuss in the future so I don't run out of stuff to talk about on the channel.